I am Aria Blackwood, and I am 35 years old. The cafe smelled of burnt espresso and quiet disappointment. The kind that soaked into old wooden floors and brick walls after years of watching people come in full of hope and leave carrying resignation. It was the sort of place where dreams were spoken softly, then slowly abandoned. I pushed through the narrow glass door at exactly 6:43 a.m., my timing precise, almost ritualistic, as though punctuality was the last thing in my life still under my control. Before this story goes any further, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Your engagement helps stories like this reach the people who need them the most, even when they don't realize it yet. My hair was twisted into a loose knot at the back of my head, strands already slipping free as if they, too, were tired of being restrained. I wore an oversized slate gray sweater, soft, stretched, and clearly slept in, paired with black leggings and worn sneakers whose soles had learned the shape of the city better than I had. No makeup, no jewelry, no effort. That was intentional. Weeks earlier, I had made a quiet decision. Being invisible felt safer than being seen. Safer than inviting questions. Safer than attracting attention I no longer trusted. If I could just blend into corners, finish my coffee, complete my work, go home, maybe the ache lodged beneath my ribs would eventually quiet itself. Tonight, however, waited in my thoughts like an unwanted obligation. A blind date, arranged by Sienna Moore, my relentlessly optimistic best friend who believed love showed up when you least expected it. I already hated the idea. I planned to show up exactly like this, tired, plain, unremarkable, so the man would make a polite excuse and disappear from my life forever. A quick failure. Clean. Efficient. "Morning, Aria," called Noah, the barista, already reaching for the biggest cup without asking. "The usual," I nodded, dropping my bag onto the chair in the corner. He glanced at my face. "You look exhausted." "Make it a double," I murmured. "I'm running on fumes." Noah laughed softly. "Aren't we all?" I opened my laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting back at me like a reminder of everything I'd lost, and everything I pretended not to care about anymore. 3 months earlier, Aria Blackwood had been someone else entirely. Back then, I was a senior architectural designer at Harrison and Vale, one of the most respected firms in the city. My opinions mattered. My designs were trusted. I was given projects people fought for. I was also engaged to Daniel Cross, the firm's rising star. Together, we looked flawless, tailored clothes, polished smiles, shared ambitions. Our wedding venue had been booked months in advance. Our honeymoon was planned down to the day. Our future had been carefully staged like a model home. Then one afternoon, everything shattered. I walked into Daniel's office without knocking, holding a paper bag of takeout and a smile I never got to use. He was there with Lydia Hart, a junior associate whose perfume always lingered too long in conference rooms. The betrayal didn't unfold dramatically. It was swift. Surgical. Daniel didn't deny it. He reframed it. He twisted the story until I was the unstable one. Emotional. Difficult. Within days, whispers filled the office. By the time I understood what was happening, my reputation had already been dismantled. I resigned before I could be forced out, collecting a severance check that felt less like compensation and more like a request for silence. I packed my desk alone. No one stopped me. Now I freelanced from cafes. Accepted small renovation jobs. Avoided corporate offices, politics, and people who smiled too easily. "You look like you're plotting something dangerous," Sienna said suddenly, sliding into the chair across from me. She looked immaculate as always, pressed coat, styled hair, optimism untouched by reality. "I might be," I replied without lifting my eyes. She leaned closer. "Please tell me you're still coming tonight." "I am," I sighed. "But don't expect miracles." Her eyes widened. "You're going like this?" "Exactly like this." "That's self-sabotage." "No," I said quietly. "That's protection." She shook her head. "You can't keep punishing yourself." I finally looked up at her, my eyes tired but sharp. "Watch me." The rest of the day passed in fragments, emails, sketches, measurements. I spent most of it at an old bookstore renovation in Riverside Heights, a project I'd taken because the owner, Mrs. Calder, didn't care where I'd worked before. She trusted instinct more than credentials. By early evening, I stood in the cafe restroom staring at my reflection. Pale skin, dark circles, dry lips, messy hair. "You look exactly how you feel," I whispered. The restaurant Sienna chose, Elm and Stone, was warm and intimate, candlelight softening every edge. I arrived on time and secretly hoped my date would already be seated, so I could get this over with quickly. Instead, a man stood as I approached. He wasn't flashy. No suit. No designer watch. Just a navy sweater, dark jeans, and an ease that suggested confidence without arrogance. Tall. Dark-haired. A faint scar above his eyebrow that made him look real instead of polished. "Aria?" he asked, smiling. "I'm Julian Hale," he said, extending his hand. His voice was calm, unguarded. I shook his hand, waiting for discomfort that never came. Conversation flowed in a way I hadn't experienced in months. He asked about my work, and I told the truth, about the bookstore, about preserving history instead of chasing prestige. He listened like it mattered. When the check arrived, I insisted on splitting it. Julian didn't argue. "I respect that," he said simply. Outside, the air was cool. "I really enjoyed tonight," he said. "Would you like to do this again?" I hesitated, then nodded. Something unfamiliar stirred inside me. Hope and fear. I did not tell myself I was falling in love. I told myself I was curious. Curious was safer. Curious didn't demand vulnerability or courage. Curious didn't reopen wounds that had barely scabbed over. So when Julian Hale texted me the morning after our dinner, asking if I wanted to walk along the river that weekend, I agreed under the excuse of curiosity. The truth was simpler and far more dangerous. I felt seen. Not admired. Not assessed. Seen. We met on a Saturday afternoon near Harborline Park, the city buzzing softly around us. Julian arrived carrying 2 coffees, remembered exactly how I took mine without asking. Black. 2 sugars. That detail alone unsettled me more than it should have. "You pay attention," I said. "I like to," he replied. We walked for hours. Talked about nothing and everything. He told me stories about moving often as a child, about learning early how to be adaptable, about how people expected things from him he never volunteered to give. I told him about architecture school, about the way old buildings felt alive if you listened closely enough, about how losing my job felt less like losing a career and more like losing an identity. Julian listened without interrupting, without offering solutions. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't flinch when my voice caught on certain memories. That alone was intoxicating. Weeks passed quietly, gently. Coffee dates turned into long walks. Walks turned into dinners. Dinners turned into late nights talking on my couch, shoes kicked off, laughter echoing softly against walls that had known too much silence. Julian never commented on my appearance. Not once. Some days I wore lipstick and felt like myself again. Other days I showed up barefaced and exhausted. He treated me the same in both moments. But something felt incomplete. He never spoke about his work in detail. He never invited me to his place. When his phone rang, he sometimes stepped away to answer it. Not secretively, just carefully. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself people were allowed privacy. After everything I'd survived, who was I to demand transparency from someone else? Still, doubt has a way of whispering when the room gets quiet. The first Real crack appeared at a gallery opening. Julian invited me to an exhibition showcasing local artists, small, intimate, filled with paintings of ordinary city life. I arrived feeling nervous, unsure of how to exist in spaces that once felt natural to me. Julian greeted me with coffee already in hand. "You remembered," I said softly. "I remember most things that matter," he replied. We wandered the gallery slowly. In front of a painting of an old brick townhouse, Julian asked about the architectural details. I surprised myself by answering with passion I hadn't shared in months. He listened like every word mattered. "You love this," he said. "I used to," I admitted. Something inside me loosened. Maybe it was the warmth of the room. Maybe it was the safety in his presence. Or maybe I was simply tired of holding everything in. I told him everything. Daniel. The betrayal. The rumors. The quiet humiliation of packing my desk alone. The fear that followed me everywhere now. The fear of trusting again. When I finished, I apologized automatically. That was probably too much. Julian shook his head. It wasn't. There was no pity in his voice. Only certainty. We grew closer after that. More honest. More connected. But the missing pieces began to weigh heavier. He still avoided details about his work. Still never invited me home. One evening, unable to carry the question any longer, I asked, "What do you actually do, Julian?" He froze. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, but unmistakable. "I run an investment firm," he said carefully. Which one? He hesitated. North Shore Holdings. The name struck like thunder. I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't. I excused myself, went to the bathroom, locked the door, and searched it on my phone. The truth exploded across the screen. North Shore Holdings wasn't just successful. It was colossal. A private equity giant. Julian Hale wasn't just an executive. He was the majority owner. A billionaire. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, my hands trembling. Memories rushed and uninvited. People smiling differently once they learned someone's worth. Expectations. Power. Distance. When I returned, Julian was still seated, eyes fixed on the table. You're obscenely wealthy, I said quietly. He nodded. Yes. You didn't think that was important to mention? I didn't want you to see my money before you saw me. My chest tightened. You should have trusted me. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't mean to hurt you. But he already had. I stood. I need space. He didn't follow me. He didn't argue. He simply watched me leave. The weeks that followed were heavier than anything I'd experienced after Daniel. Back then, anger had propelled me forward. Now there was only emptiness. I buried myself in work. Arrived at the bookstore renovation before sunrise. Stayed until Mrs. Calder gently reminded me to eat. My hands ached from sanding shelves, restoring panels, sketching late into the night. Julian texted. Apologized. Explained. Never demanded. I read every message. Deleted them all. Sienna showed up unannounced one afternoon, arms crossed. You can't hide forever, she said. Watch me, I replied, sanding harder than necessary. 2 days later, a stranger arrived at the renovation site. She was elegant, composed, calm in a way that suggested authority earned, not demanded. Miss Blackwood, she said, extending a hand. I'm Evelyn Hale, Julian's mother. My stomach dropped. You shouldn't be here, I said stiffly. I know, she nodded. But I am. Over tea, Evelyn told me about Julian's past. About women who saw numbers before names. About a broken engagement years ago that left him guarded, cautious, afraid of being loved for the wrong reasons. He didn't test you, she said softly. He hid because he was afraid. So was I admitted. After she left, Mrs. Calder sat beside me. Love built on fear always cracks, she said gently. But love rebuilt with truth, that can last. That night, something inside me shifted. I reread Julian's last message. I won't come to the bookstore opening. I don't want to ruin it for you. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a woman who had been shrinking herself to feel safe. Enough, I whispered. The bookstore opening buzzed with warmth and laughter. Shelves glowed under soft lights. I had dressed intentionally, not to impress, but to show up fully. Julian wasn't there. Disappointment stung, but clarity followed. Where does he live? I asked Sienna. She groaned. Aria, don't do this halfway. 20 minutes later, I stood in the lobby of a quiet luxury building. The elevator carried me upward before doubt could stop me. Julian opened the door, stunned. Aria, I was hiding too, I said quickly. I dressed down, played indifferent. Tested you because I was afraid to try and fail again. You hid your wealth. I hid myself. His voice shook. I never wanted to hurt you. I know, I said. But if we do this, it has to be real. All of it. He nodded. I want that. We returned to the bookstore hand in hand. I thought choosing honesty would make everything easier. I was wrong. Being honest didn't erase fear. It didn't suddenly make life smooth or predictable. What it did was strip away the illusion of safety I'd built around myself. And standing exposed, fully seen, was both terrifying and freeing. Julian and I didn't fall into a fairy tale after that night at the bookstore. We didn't float. We worked. The days that followed were quiet but deliberate. We talked more than we ever had before, about money, power, expectations, and the invisible lines wealth draws around people. Julian told me stories he had never shared with anyone. About childhood dinners where conversations revolved around markets instead of feelings. About being taught early that trust was a liability. About learning how quickly affection changed once people discovered what he owned. I listened without judgment. And when it was my turn, I spoke about shrinking myself to feel safe. About dressing down, playing small, hoping invisibility would protect me from disappointment. About how losing my career had left me unsure of my worth. Some nights, the conversations were heavy. Other nights, we laughed until we fell asleep on opposite ends of the couch, exhaustion softening everything. It wasn't easy, but it was real. Julian slowly invited me into his world. Quiet charity dinners where influence was measured in whispers. Boardrooms with glass walls and unspoken hierarchies. I told him when it overwhelmed me. He never dismissed it. He never rushed me. And he entered my world just as fully. Paint-stained weekends. Dusty renovation sites. Community meetings where residents argued passionately about preserving buildings most people had forgotten. One afternoon, covered in plaster and sweat, Julian laughed and said, "This feels more honest than anything I've done in years." 3 months later, he surprised everyone, including me. He stepped down as CEO of North Shore Holdings, remaining only as chairman. "I want to build something that matters," he told me one night as we sat at my kitchen table, blueprints spread between us. "Something lasting. With you." He proposed the idea of a foundation, one dedicated to architectural preservation and community restoration. He asked me to lead it. Fear flared instantly. "I don't know how to run something like that," I admitted. Julian reached across the table. "You know how to build. I'll handle what you don't know, until you do." I hesitated, then nodded. "I'll learn." The Blackwood, Hale Heritage Foundation launched quietly. No flashy press conference. No spectacle. Just intention. Within a year, we were restoring community spaces threatened by neglect. Libraries, theaters, cultural centers, places that held memory, places people thought no longer mattered. On one project, I crossed paths with Harrison and Vale, my old firm. I expected anger, bitterness. Closure came instead. Calm, distance, indifference. The engagement happened quietly. After hours in the same bookstore where everything had begun, Julian knelt between the shelves. No crowd. No cameras. "I don't need grand gestures," I told him. Julian smiled. "Good. Because I just need you." We married in a restored historic theater that had once been abandoned and forgotten. Now it breathed again. Light poured through repaired windows. The walls carried history. As I walked down the aisle, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't trying to be perfect. I was present. Julian cried openly. Mrs. Calder caught the bouquet and announced loudly, "Second chances are criminally underrated." Sienna claimed credit for everything. During our first dance, Julian whispered, "Any regrets?" I thought about the woman I used to be, the one hiding in oversized sweaters, hoping to disappear. "Not one," I said, then smiled. "Except trying so hard to scare you away." He laughed softly. "You failed spectacularly." Marriage didn't soften my life into something glossy or unreal. It sharpened it. The weeks after the wedding weren't beaches and champagne. I returned to work the following Monday, standing inside a half-collapsed community library in Queensport, blueprints tucked under my arm. Julian stood beside me, sleeves rolled up, listening as I explained load-bearing walls and restoration priorities. "You don't have to come to every site," I reminded him. "I want to understand what you see," he replied. That became our rhythm. Curiosity instead of assumptions. Questions instead of silence. "Some nights," I admitted quietly, "I still feel like I don't belong in your world." Julian never contradicted me with empty reassurance. He simply said, "Then we'll build a world where you do." Slowly, the instinct to disappear loosened its grip. I wore makeup when I wanted to. I didn't when I didn't. I spoke up in rooms that once intimidated me. I set boundaries without apology. The foundation grew faster than anyone expected. Grants poured in. Neighborhood leaders called me directly. At a press conference, a reporter asked how it felt to be married to one of the most powerful men in the country. I smiled politely. I don't run my life based on who I'm married to. Later that night, Julian laughed over takeout containers spread across our counter. "You were terrifying." "Good," I replied. The real test came when Daniel Cross reappeared, seeking funding for a redevelopment project that would erase an entire historic block. I listened calmly. "We're not aligned," I said. When he tried to reopen the past, I stopped him. "You don't get access to me anymore." I walked away steady. No shaking hands. No racing heart. That night, Julian kissed my forehead. "I'm proud of you." I realized then that healing wasn't forgetting. It was standing firmly in who I had become. One quiet evening, months later, I returned alone to the cafe where everything had begun. Same burnt espresso. Same corner table. I wore a fitted coat. Hair loose. Face bare. Not as armor. Not as defiance. As choice. Noah raised an eyebrow. "The usual?" "Yes," I said softly. I watched people rush past the window, some hopeful, some broken, all becoming something new. I smiled at the memory of the woman who once sat here determined to be invisible. She had survived. But this version of me, this Aria, was living. Julian arrived moments later and slid into the chair across from me, taking my hand without ceremony. "Ready to go home?" he asked. I nodded. Home wasn't a place anymore. It was honesty, courage, love built slowly and truthfully. 2 years later, I stood on the steps of the restored Harlem Crescent Theater as children poured out after an afternoon performance, their laughter echoing against walls that once stood silent. "You did this," Julian said. "We did this," I corrected. That night back at home, I caught my reflection in the mirror, confident, grounded, unmistakably myself. "I don't disappear anymore," I whispered. Years later, I told young architects my story, not as a fairy tale, but as a lesson. Don't make yourself smaller to feel safe. Demand truth. Offer it too. As Julian and I stepped into the city night together, I didn't think about what might go wrong. I thought about what we would build next. And for the first time in my life, that thought didn't scare me at all. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. And tell us where you're watching from in the comment section. Your support means more than you know.